The night draped over Willow Creek like a heavy shroud, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the land in a pitch-black void, pierced only by the faint glimmer of distant stars. Laura Tate, a frail 23-year-old with determination etched into her bones, staggered through the brush, her bare feet torn by sharp thorns and jagged stones, each step sending waves of pain up her legs. Her dress, once a soft yellow handed down from her mother, was now a tattered ruin, ripped by rough hands and stained with blood and sweat that plastered her hair to her pale, bruised face. The air hung heavy with the scent of dry earth and the coppery tang of her wounds. A deep cut across her forearm from a knife, a swollen cheek from a brutal fist. Hours earlier, a gang of ruthless outlaws had stormed her isolated cabin, their voices thick with greed for the gold rumored to lie beneath her father's land. When she refused to surrender the deed, they turned savage, beating her with fists and boots, tearing at her clothes as their laughter echoed through the night. She had fought with every ounce of strength, her nails clawing at one man's face, drawing blood, her knee slamming into another's gut, a scream ripping from her throat that echoed off the hills. But they were too many, their hands too strong. The leader, a scar-faced brute with eyes like coal, had pinned her down, his knife flashing as he sliced her arm, warning her to comply or die. "You'll talk, or we'll take more than the land," he had growled, his breath reeking of whiskey. Left for dead in the dirt, her body battered and her spirit teetering, Laura had crawled away, driven by a flicker of hope she barely recognized. The outlaw's shouts faded, but the shame and pain clung to her like a second skin, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The landscape stretched endlessly around her, a desolate expanse of scrub and sand under a sky that offered no mercy. Her vision swam with tears and exhaustion, the blood from her arm dripping onto the ground, marking her path. She clutched the torn fabric to her chest, her other hand pressing against the wound, the throbbing a constant reminder of her ordeal. In the distance, a faint light flickered, a ranch, its silhouette barely discernible against the dark. Her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees, the sand grinding into her palms. "Wait, I'll take it off," she murmured, her voice a broken whisper, a desperate offer born of survival, ready to trade her dignity for safety if it meant escaping further harm. The sound of hooves thudded through the night, growing closer, and Laura's heart leapt into her throat. Had the outlaws tracked her? She shrank behind a gnarled mesquite bush, peering through the branches, her body trembling with fear. But it wasn't them. It was a lone figure on a sturdy bay horse, his broad shoulders hunched with the weight of years. James Ryder, 53, a rancher who had retreated from the world after losing his wife to a bandit raid a decade ago, reined in his mount, the creak of leather breaking the silence. His face was weathered, lines carved deep by sun and sorrow, his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much pain. He dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud, and spotted her, a broken figure in the dust, bloodied and shaking. Laura rose unsteadily, her legs threatening to collapse, her hands clutching the rags tighter. "Please, don't hurt me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. James froze, his hand hovering near his holster, the sight of her vulnerability hitting him like a physical blow. Memories of his wife, beaten and left to die, flashed before his eyes, tightening his chest. "Wait, I'll take it off," she added, her head bowed, her words a surrender to save herself. James's jaw clenched, his mind reeling. He wasn't that kind of man. No, he had once been a protector, before grief turned him inward. "Hold up," he said, his voice rough but gentle, stepping closer. "Ain't no need for that. Let's get you inside." He offered his arm, and Laura, wary but out of options, took it, her weight leaning into him as they moved toward the ranch. The cabin door groaned open, revealing a sparse interior, wooden table, a cold stove, a rifle mounted on the wall. James guided her to a chair, his movements slow, deliberate, the air inside carrying the faint smell of hay and old leather. He fetched a worn blanket, draping it over her shoulders, his hand steadying as she shivered. "What happened?" he asked, his tone low, guarded. Laura's story poured out, her father's land, the outlaw's greed, her fight, her voice breaking with each word. James listened, his face hardening, the past and present colliding in his mind. Outside, the wind howled, a warning of trouble to come. He knew this refuge wouldn't hold forever. If you've come this far into the story, take a sip of your tea or coffee, sit back, and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next, because this night is far from over, and it helps keep these Wild West tales alive. The cabin door creaked shut behind James, the sound a faint echo in the stillness as he guided Laura to a rickety chair by the cold stove. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a single lantern hanging from a hook, its yellow light casting long shadows across the rough wooden walls. The air inside carried the musty scent of old leather and hay, a stark contrast to the violence Laura had fled. She sank into the chair, her body trembling from exhaustion, the blanket James had draped over her shoulders slipping slightly to reveal the blood-streaked gash on her arm. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one a reminder of the beating that had left her ribs aching and her spirit bruised. James stood a few feet away, his broad frame tense, his weathered face etched with lines of concern and something deeper, pain he hadn't faced in years. He moved to the stove, striking a match with a sharp hiss, the flame flaring briefly before settling into a steady glow as he lit the kindling. The crackle of wood filled the silence, a small comfort in the cold night. "You're safe here, for now," he said, his voice rough like gravel, the drawl of a man who spoke more to cattle than people. He fetched a tin cup and poured water from a jug, handing it to her with hands that trembled slightly. Hands that had once held a rifle steady, but now shook with the weight of memory. Laura took it, her fingers brushing his, and drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, mixing with the dried blood. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile, her eyes meeting his for a moment before dropping to the floor. James turned away, busying himself with gathering supplies. A worn cloth, a bottle of whiskey from a shelf cluttered with tools and canned goods. The cabin was sparse, a table scarred with knife marks, a single bed in the corner, a rifle mounted above the door. Every item told a story of a life pared down to survival after loss. 10 years ago, outlaws had raided his ranch, killing his wife, Eliza, in a hail of bullets while he was out mending a fence. He had found her body, her blood soaking the earth, and the guilt had hollowed him out, turning him into a recluse. Now this girl, Laura, sat in his home, her pain mirroring his past, and it stirred something he thought long dead. "Tell me what happened," he said, kneeling beside her, the whiskey bottle in hand. Laura hesitated, her fingers tightening on the blanket. Then the words spilled out, halting at first, then rushing like a flood. "They came for my land, my father's land. Said there's gold buried there. I wouldn't sign it over, so they beat me, tore at me." Her voice broke, and she pulled the blanket tighter. "Wait, I'll take it off," she murmured, her head bowing, the offer slipping out, a desperate bid for mercy she'd learned from their threats. James froze, his breath catching, the bottle slipping slightly in his grip. The image of Eliza, violated and abandoned, flashed before him, and for a moment he was lost in that old pain. But then he shook his head, his jaw tightening. "No," he said firmly, his voice steadying. "Ain't no one gonna treat you like that here. Not while I'm around." He dipped the cloth in whiskey, the sharp scent cutting through the room, and gently pressed it to her arm. Laura winced, a soft cry escaping her lips, her body tensing. "Easy. It hurts," she whispered. James nodded, his touch careful. "I know. I'm almost done. Just cleaning it." The wound was deep, the skin red and angry, but he worked methodically, wrapping it with a clean strip of fabric from an old shirt. Her trust in him grew with each gentle movement, a fragile thread in the darkness. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters, a warning of the danger that might follow. James stood, checking the rifle above the door, his mind racing. The outlaws wouldn't stop. They'd track her blood, her trail. He glanced at Laura, now leaning back, her eyes half closed, exhaustion claiming her. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." She nodded weakly, the blanket pulled close, her breathing slowing. James sat by the window, the lantern light flickering, his hand resting on the rifle. The knight held its breath, and with it, the promise of a fight he couldn't avoid. The past had found him again, but this time, he wouldn't run. If this tale's got you hooked, take a sip of your coffee or tea, lean back, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next because the storm's brewing, and it helps keep these Wild West stories alive. The fire sputtered in the hearth, its dim glow casting jagged shadows across the cabin walls. The only light in the deep night, save for the lantern's flicker on the table. James sat by the window, his rifle resting across his knees, the cold metal a familiar weight against his calloused hands. The wind outside howled through the cracks, rattling the shutters like a warning, carrying the faint scent of dust and impending trouble. Laura lay on the bench, her breathing uneven. The blanket pulled tight around her as fever began to take hold. The bandage on her arm was damp with fresh blood, the wound festering despite his efforts, the air thick with the sour smell of infection. He had done what he could, cleaned it with whiskey, wrapped it with care, but the frontier was no place for healing, and her strength was fading fast. His mind drifted unbidden to that cursed night 10 years ago. The outlaws had come at dusk, their horses thundering across the plains, guns blazing in the twilight. He had been out checking the herd, leaving Eliza alone with their young daughter, Hannah. When he returned, the ranch was a smoking ruin, the air heavy with the stench of burnt wood and blood. Eliza lay crumpled by the door, her dress torn, her face frozen in terror, Hannah's tiny body beside her, lifeless. The guilt had consumed him, a fire that burned brighter than any hatred, turning him into a shadow of the man he once was. He had vowed never to let anyone close again, building his life around solitude and the rifle that now sat in his lap. But Laura's presence, her pain, her courage, had cracked that vow, stirring memories he'd buried deep. Laura stirred, her eyes fluttering open, glassy with fever. "Water!" she rasped, her voice a threadbare whisper. James rose, his joints creaking, and poured from the jug, holding the cup to her lips. She drank slowly, water trickling down her chin, mixing with sweat and blood, her hand trembling as it brushed his. "Thank you," she murmured, her gaze meeting his, a spark of gratitude amid the haze. "They'll come back, for the gold. My father hid it, but they won't believe me." James's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. He knew those men, greedy, ruthless, the same kind who had taken his family. "They won't touch you," he said, his voice low, a promise laced with steel. He stood pacing the small room, boots thudding on the worn floorboards. The cabin was a fortress of simplicity, a table scarred with use, shelves lined with canned goods, the rifle a silent sentinel. Outside, the wind carried a new sound, distant hoofbeats, faint but growing. James peered through the window, his breath fogging the glass. Shadows moved on the horizon, 3 riders cutting through the night, their silhouettes ominous against the starless sky. "They're close," he muttered, grabbing the rifle, checking the chamber with a metallic click that echoed in the silence. Laura struggled to sit, her face paling. "I can help. I know the land," she said, her voice weak but determined. James shook his head. "Stay down. This is my fight now." As the riders drew nearer, their voices carried on the wind. Crude laughter, threats about the gold. The leader, a hulking figure with a scar across his neck, called out, "We know she's in there, rider. Hand her over, or we burn this place down." James' grip on the rifle tightened, his past and present colliding. The image of Eliza's broken body fueled his resolve, but Laura's trust anchored him. He glanced at her, her eyes wide with fear but steady. "Hold on," he said softly. "I'll handle this." She nodded, clutching the blanket, her pain a silent plea. James moved to the door, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. The fight was coming, and with it, a chance to reclaim the man he had lost, or lose everything again. "So tell me something, partner. If you were James, would you face those riders or send Laura out to save yourself? Take a sip of your coffee or maybe that evening tea. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you don't want to miss what happens next, you might want to hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started." The night pressed against the cabin like a living thing, the wind howling through the gaps, carrying the distant thud of hooves and the guttural shouts of the approaching riders. James stood at the door, his rifle gripped tight, the stock cool against his palm, his breath steady despite the storm brewing outside. The lantern inside flickered, casting erratic shadows across the room, illuminating Laura's pale face as she struggled to sit up on the bench. Her fever had worsened, beads of sweat glistening on her forehead, the bandage on her arm soaked with blood and pus, the infection spreading like wildfire. "Stay down," James growled, his voice rough with urgency, glancing back at her. Her eyes wide with fear and resolve met his. "I can't just lie here," she whispered, her hand reaching for the pistol he had left on the table. "They'll kill you if I don't help." James shook his head, his jaw set. "You're in no shape. This is my fight." But her determination mirrored his own buried strength, a reminder of the man he once was. The riders were close now, their silhouettes sharp against the faint moonlight breaking through the clouds. Three men, led by the scar-necked leader, their horses snorting as they reined in just beyond the fence. The leader dismounted, his boots kicking up dust, a revolver gleaming in his hand. "Last chance, rider," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the wind. "Hand her over, or we burn this shack to ash." His companions chuckled, their guns drawn, the air thick with the scent of gunpowder and malice. James stepped onto the porch, the rifle raised, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and fury. The past surged forward, Eliza's scream, Hannah's silence, fueling a rage he had suppressed for years. "You ain't taking her," he shouted, his drawl thick with defiance. The leader smirked, firing a warning shot that splintered the porch rail, the crack echoing like thunder. James ducked behind a barrel, returning fire, the rifle's recoil jarring his shoulder. The bullet grazed the leader's arm, drawing a curse as he stumbled back. The other two charged, guns blazing, bullets thudding into the wood, kicking up dirt and splinters. James rolled, firing again, hitting one in the thigh, the man collapsing with a howl. Inside, Laura ignored the pain searing through her side, gripping the pistol with shaking hands. She dragged herself to the window, peering out as the second bandit advanced, his gun aimed at James. "No!" she cried, her voice raw, and fired. The shot went wide, but it distracted the man long enough for James to take him down, a clean shot to the chest, dropping him into the dust. The leader, enraged, drew a second gun, firing wildly, a bullet grazing James's leg, blood seeping through his trousers. He grunted, falling to one knee but kept shooting, his aim true. The leader staggered, clutching his side, then mounted his horse and fled, cursing into the night, leaving his fallen men behind. James limped back inside, his leg throbbing, blood staining the floorboards. Laura rushed to him, her own wound reopening, blood trickling down her arm. "You're hurt," she gasped, her hands trembling as she tried to help him to the bench. "Easy. Please, it hurts," she murmured, her voice breaking. James winced, lowering himself beside her. "I'm almost done. Just need to patch us both," he said, his tone soft despite the pain. He grabbed the whiskey and rags, tending to her arm first, then his leg, the alcohol burning as it cleaned the wounds. The cabin fell silent, the fight's echoes fading, replaced by the crackle of the fire. They sat together, the lantern light dancing over their battered forms, a fragile peace settling in. Laura's hand rested on his, a silent thank you, her trust in him deepening. James felt the weight of his past lift slightly, replaced by a purpose he hadn't known in years. Outside, the wind carried the scent of blood and dust, a reminder that the leader would return. But for now, they had won a moment, a chance to heal. The gold on Laura's land remained a secret, but the bond between them was becoming its own treasure, forged in blood and bravery. If this showdown has you on edge, take a sip of your drink, lean back, and think about it. Would you have stood with James or stayed hidden like Laura? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if this story moved you, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, a stark contrast to the blood-streaked yard where the bodies of the fallen bandits lay still. The wind had died, leaving a heavy silence that pressed against the cabin, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire within. James sat on the porch, his leg bandaged with a makeshift wrap, the sting of whiskey still lingering on the wound. His rifle leaned against the railing, its barrel warm from the night's fight, a silent witness to the battle they'd survived. Inside, Laura rested on the bench, her arm freshly bound, the fever broken at last, though her face remained pale, etched with the exhaustion of survival. The air carried the scent of smoke and earth, a reminder of the violence that had brought them together. James rubbed his beard, the gray hairs scratching his palm, his mind replaying the night. The Scar-Neck leader's escape gnawed at him. He knew the man would return with reinforcements, perhaps the law twisted by the gold's lure. But for now the ranch stood quiet, the horses in the corral nickering softly, the desert stretching out like a vast, unjudging witness. He limped inside, checking on Laura, who stirred as he approached. "You're still here," she murmured, a weak smile tugging at her lips, her hand reaching for his. James took it, his grip gentle but firm, the calluses on his fingers brushing her skin. "Ain't going nowhere," he said, his voice low, the drawl softened by a rare warmth. "We made it through." Laura's story unfolded as they sat by the fire, the flames casting a golden glow over their battered forms. She spoke of her father, a prospector who had struck gold but hidden it to protect her, leaving only cryptic maps she couldn't decipher. "They think I know where it is," she said, her voice trembling, "but I don't. I just want the land." James listened, his own past surfacing, how he had failed to protect Eliza, how the gold had drawn killers then, too. "Maybe it's cursed," he muttered, but his eyes held a new light, a resolve to shield Laura from the same fate. "We'll find it together," he said, "or bury it deeper." Her hand squeezed his, a silent pact forming, their trust deepening into something more, a bond forged in shared pain and survival. Days turned to weeks. The leader returned with a posse, but James and Laura were ready. With help from a few townsfolk who believed her tale, they ambushed the attackers, turning the tables. The gold's location remained a mystery, but the land was secured, the Baron's influence broken in court. Laura healed, her scars fading, her laughter returning as she worked beside James tending the ranch. He rebuilt the barn, his hands steady for the first time in years, her presence a balm to his grief. Their hands brushed often, eyes meeting with a quiet understanding. Love growing slow and steady like the roots of a desert plant. The ranch came alive again, filled with the sounds of life where silence once reigned. The townsfolk still whisper the story. The wounded girl who ran through the night, the old rancher who stood against the storm. And each time, they end with a lesson. Sometimes the pain that nearly breaks us is the forge that shapes us into something stronger. Maybe that's true for you too. What hurt have you carried that's made you who you are? If this thought lingers, it means the story worked its magic. Before you go, I want to speak from the heart. I'm deeply grateful for every one of you who watches these tales, leaving kind comments that I read with care. I see many of you up late, past midnight even, and it worries me. Please take care of yourselves. These stories are here to comfort, not to steal your rest. If it's late where you are, close your eyes soon. The West will wait. I don't always reply, and I apologize. My years are catching up, and editing these videos tires me more than I like. That's why I cherish my health now, and yours too. Thank you for keeping these Wild West stories alive. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight?